this is my wash still. So we've taken our wash from the wash back and we put it into the wash still. As you can see, these are relatively small pot stills. When the distillery was built, the original design was not necessarily to produce quite as much whiskey as we're producing now. In fact, the law still requires that the smallest size of still is 18 hectolitres, 1,800 litres, which is not this one, it's my spirit still. So that kind of dictates the size of the distillery. There has been, because of the explosion in craft distilling in the last 10 to 12 years, they have granted distilling licenses to smaller distilleries. But at the time this distillery was founded, and I would like to think pretty much we were at the forefront of that. If we look back 12, 13 years ago when we actually started to distill here, no one else was doing it. We didn't have the amount of gin producers. We didn't have any single malt whiskey distilleries. I really genuinely believe that this was the catalyst. We had lots of people here in the early days looking at doing it, and I think we catalysed the industry. I think we really gave it a reboot. So we're putting the wash in here. So that yellow liquid I just showed you, my basic beer, my wash, that's what's in here now. The wash still, we're just really using it to strip out the flavour and the aroma and the alcohol. We're concentrating those things down. So distillation works because the flavour compounds, the aroma compounds and the alcohols that we produce during fermentation have lower boiling points than water. Now people tend to think of boiling as 100 degrees centigrade. Oh, it's 100 degrees centigrade, which is the boiling point of pure water, distilled water at sea level. It is not the boiling point of all liquids. So different liquids have different boiling points. If you take salt water, it will boil at a higher temperature. But as I've just said, we've got wash in here. So flavour compounds, aroma compounds, alcohols, water, yeast cells, all of those things are in the still and we're applying heat. It means that those compounds will distill off. They'll burn off faster than we're burning off the water. So at the moment, the alcohol, to give you a kind of visual, the alcohol's doing this and the water's doing this. So what that means is we're blasting off the alcohol quicker and the flavour and the aroma. We're always going to take water. You can't not do that. But there will come a point where we've got all those other things off and now we're just distilling water. Well, we're not interested as distillers. We don't want to do that. We don't want to make distilled water. We want to make whiskey because it's a lot more fun. So that when we're not distilling alcohol off anymore, because that's the measure that we use, we stop. These stills are actually quite high relative to the pot size. Taller stills tend to give you a lighter, kind of sweeter whiskey. So if you want a kind of heavier, slightly more oily whiskey on the palate, short, maybe dumpy still. If you want a lighter texture, you want to use a higher still. So something like Glenmorangie, very fruity, very light, tallest stills in the industry. It's a very light character on the whiskey. So as you can see on the wash still, it's a traditional kind of what we call a lantern still. It looks like an old-fashioned oil lamp. We've got this nip in as we come out of the pot, and then it flares out into this lantern and then goes up into a descending line arm, which we'll talk about in a minute. So as we're distilling these compounds off, we have this narrow neck, so they accelerate through there quite rapidly. But because that neck then widens, there's less pressure, so they decelerate rapidly at this point. So they're fired through and then decelerate, and that causes those vapours to start swirling round in this area, and that's giving them a lot of contact with the copper, what we call reflux. So that copper contact is very important. It's producing flavour and aroma complexes. Additionally, I spoke about the height. So relatively, and I do mean relatively because if you could feel it, it's quite hot where I'm standing, it's cooler here than it is here. So if I am a little organic compound that hits its boiling point here and I rise up in the still, I'm now further away from the heat source. So I might drop now below my boiling point. I turn back into a liquid, in other words, and that liquid will rub back on the copper. So that's that refluxing we're talking about. So in order to make your way all the way out the top, of the neck of the still, you have to be really light, you have to have lots of energy, you have to be very volatile. So if you have a tall still, only those light, really highly volatile compounds are going to make their way out. And our whiskey is very fruity, it's very light. I've talked about those estery compounds during the fermentation process, and we want to start distilling those off. So you make your way all the way to the top, and then you go over. Now we have a descending line arm, which means once you've gone over the top, there's only one way to go. You're going to go down into the condenser. For me, we've got enough fruitiness here. We've got enough complex here. So we want, you know, the descending line arm is fine into the condenser. We have shell and tube condensers. So we're pretty standard. We don't have worm tubs. We have a shell and tube condenser. So some of the noise you can hear that I'm talking over is the water pumping through the condensers to keep them nice and cool. So it's really, really hot where I'm standing. I could easily put my hand on the condenser. So we're cooling down to around 17, 18 degrees on the distillate. That's nice and cool. We have a very slow rate of distillation, as you'll probably see. We don't want to blast it through. We're not going to pour it out. Slower is better. We want to condense it slowly. We want to really trap that flavour into the liquid that we're getting. So what we're really doing on the wash still, on this first still, is we're stripping the alcohol, we're stripping the flavour, and we're stripping the aroma out. And we collect all of that liquid. So all of the liquid that we strip from this first still, distillers refer to as low wines. Now on the first strip, the composite strength of that is going to be somewhere in the region of 23–24% alcohol. So that's the strip from this first still. So we're just putting it into a big tank. But we don't leave it like that. We need to add another couple of things to it before we can redistill it. So what we do is we strip the low wines from the first still, and then we take those low wines and boil them again in our spirit still. Now as you'll see, our spirit still is a slightly different design. It has a boil ball in the neck. Try saying that when you've had a few whiskies at the end of the day. Similar height and a descending line arm. So the boil ball is causing, again, lots of reflux. It's causing those vapours to swirl around in the still and giving us lots of copper contact. So from the second still, from the spirit still, we're going to strip all of the liquid, as we do from the wash still. But on the spirit still, we split it into 3 parts. And it's very important that we do this. The first part, we reject. We call it heads. That's the easy way to remember it. Distillers tend to refer to this as 4 shots. To make it easy, heads. So we reject the heads, we reject the 4 shots. We're primarily using them to flush and clean the still from the end of the last distillation run, but also we're rejecting some of those compounds we don't want in the finished whiskey. Methanol, highly toxic alcohol. All alcohol is toxic, just be aware of that, everyone. All alcohol is toxic, but methanol, highly toxic due to the way your body breaks it down. And that tends to come off early in the distillation run, has a very low boiling point, 64 degrees. So we want to reject that. We want to make sure we got rid of that methanol. So we send that in to the low wines. So we mix the heads, the 4 shots, in to the liquid that we're making from our wash still, because we can reprocess it. When we're ready, we divert the flow to take the heart or the middle cut. Now that's the bit that we're going to take to turn into whiskey today. Quite simply, we send it into another funnel in the spirit safe. We redirect it to a separate collecting tank. We steal some. That will take an hour and a half to 2 hours. When we've taken that, we redirect the flow to what we call the tails. So you've got heads, hearts, and tails. It's the easy way to remember it. I would refer to it as 4 shots, which is the heads, the heart, same word, and then I'd call it feints. F-E-I-N-T-S, feints. The feints, again, we want to reject. We're going to be distilling off compounds that we don't really want in the finished whiskey. And they can be, I mean, they're highly toxic, some of them, but also, initially, when you go on to the feints, they're quite bitter, quite harsh on the palate. Now, you can take some of the feints to balance the sweetness, those estery, fruity compounds that you got at the start. You want balance. If you take too many, for me, the whiskey becomes unbalanced, and whiskey's about flavour. And if you unbalance it, you don't get that kind of flavour profile that you want. You can take some, you just want to go too deep. So again, on the spirit still, on the second still, it's going to run for 6 or 7 hours, so they run for about the same time. So the foreshots and the feints, the heads and the tails, get mixed in with the low wines that we're making here. So at that point, they're then around 28% alcohol. So remember, it's 23% as it comes from here, but once you put the foreshots and feints in, it raises the strength to about 28. So that combination of what you've taken from your wash still and the foreshots and feints from the previous distillation in your spirit still is what charges your spirit still on the following distillation run. And it always works in the same way. So we're going to run that down, as I said, 6 or 7 hours. When we've finished, we will have liquid left in the stills. Remember I said we don't boil everything off. We've got lots of liquid left in the stills at the end of the distillation runs. So what we do, we stop it. Now this liquid is hot. We've just been boiling it for 6 hours. So it's dropped into a holding tank. We recover the heat energy the next time we fill the wash still. So we get a bit of heat recovery from it, saves us a little bit of energy, makes us a little bit greener. So we run it through a heat exchanger. That liquid, the spent liquid, then goes to the same farm that has taken the grain from our mashing process, and he will utilize that liquid. He mixes it with his slurry. He sprays it on his land. He'll use that effectively like a soil improver, like a fertilizer. You can't spray it onto the crop, onto the land only. Now I had a chat with him yesterday. He tells me he loves it because his crops come up half cut, which is the worst joke I know, quite frankly. So we've distilled, we've got our spirit. Our spirit comes off at about 73% alcohol. So a very, very high, very clean cut. That's really, really strong on the spirit side. So about 72, 73%. And then, as you know, we need to mature it.